Hello and welcome to this video on the Tableau Certified Data Analyst exam. Today I'm going to be talking about using multiple data sources, and that is specifically relationships, joins, unions, and blends. And so in this video, we're going to talk about these four different ways to combine data. First, there is relationships, and this is a Tableau specific concept. It's not something you would see in other applications, but this is Tableau's way of combining tables. Next, joins. Unlike relationships, this is a general concept. It's available in SQL. And so if you're familiar with SQL joins, you're already familiar with the joins that you'll see in Tableau. And similarly, unions. Unions are something you see if you're familiar with SQL. That's a way that SQL uses to combine rows from one table with rows from another table. And so if you're familiar with unions in SQL, you're already going to be familiar with them in Tableau. It's the same thing. Now, finally, blends. Blends are a way of combining data that's Tableau specific, and they're similar to relationships, but they can be used on published data sources. And so we'll cover more about blends later on in the video, right? And so now I just want to, before I get into the detail about these different ways of combining tables, I want to just show the documentation for these four different ways of combining data sources. And I'm going to place links under the video to this documentation. Now, pro tip, if you find I'm going too quickly or too slowly, please adjust the video speed in the bottom right. There should be a controller that will allow you to adjust the speed as needed. Now let's discuss relationships in more detail. So the first thing to know about relationships is that they combine data during analysis. And this helps to improve performance because if you have a relationship between two tables, but in a particular worksheet, you're only using one of those tables, you're not writing a query against both tables. You're only writing a query against the table that you're actually using in that worksheet. Whereas if you're using both tables, then the query would run against both tables. And so that's a way to basically minimize the amount of data you're having to pull back. And hence that's going to give you better performance and less utilization of system resources, right? So we want to be as efficient as possible. And so if we only query data when we actually need it, that's going to tend to give us better performance. And the next thing is that relationships avoid data duplication that can result from joins. So with a join, each time the join criteria is met, you get another row, and that can result in unintended data duplication. And so relationships are designed to avoid that. The next thing is that relationships keep unmatched measure values. And so this makes it similar to an outer join, where even if the relationship criteria isn't met, you don't lose data, right? You keep the data even when the relationship criteria is not met. And the same is true of dimensions and measures, although you have to set various options to make that happen. The final thing to point out is that relationships can't be used with published data sources. That's a limitation that you don't see with blends. With blends, you can blend published data sources, but you cannot create relationships with published data sources. And we'll be demonstrating this later on. So basically get these concepts, but they'll all make more sense when we do a demo to actually demonstrate these concepts. The next concept to talk about is joins. And so this is something that's different from relationships in that the tables are combined prior to analysis. So when you combine two tables with a join, you are pulling data back from both those tables and creating basically a big table, which is then the input to your Tableau analysis, right? The next thing is that joins follow standard SQL rules. So if you know SQL, if you're comfortable doing SQL joins, then you're just applying the same rules within Tableau, doing the same type of SQL joins. The other thing to note, and I mentioned this before, is that each time the join criteria is met, a row is included in the result set. And so this can at times result in duplication, maybe intentional. Sometimes you want to duplicate data. Other times it might be not desired and you need to do some work to avoid that or remove that. The next thing to note is that when the join criteria is not met even once, the behavior depends on the join type. And so you have inner, outer, left, and right joins, and those all do different things when the join criteria isn't met. And so we will cover more about left, right, inner, and outer joins later on. But basically the idea is with a left join, We're always keeping data from the left table, even if the join criteria isn't met, but we're only including data from the right table when the join criteria is met. The right is the join is the opposite. That one says that we're always going to include data from the right table when the join criteria is met. And however, we're not going to include data from the left table unless the join criteria is met. And so with the inner join, we're only including data from either table when the join criteria is actually met. And finally, with the outer join type, we are including data regardless from both the left and the right table, even when the join criteria is not met. Now let's talk about unions. Unions combine rows from one table with rows in another table. So while joins combine columns from different tables, unions combine rows from different tables. Unions are also in a SQL concept. So if you understand SQL unions, you already understand unions in Tableau. It is the same thing. The other thing to mention is that if the column names from the different tables don't align, you will need to do additional work to merge the mismatched columns. So for example, if you have like cust name in one table and customer name in the other table, you will need to do additional work to basically say that those are really the same column so that the data is lined up when you do the union. Now let's talk about blends. Blends are similar to relationships in that they are not a SQL concept and they combine data. But unlike relationships, they can use published data sources. Blends query each data source independently. The data sources are aggregated to the appropriate level and then presented the results together in the view. They use linking fields to determine how to bring the data together. So you establish the linking fields. Sort of by default, it's going to assume that columns with the same name in both tables are linking fields, but you can adjust that to determine how to combine the different data sources. Now let's switch over to a demo where I look at these various ways of combining tables. For this demo, we are going to be using the Bookshop dataset. So I'm just going to go over here to this Bookshop dataset page and download the raw data and then open up Tableau Public. I can just use Tableau Public for this example. And then I'm going to start opening up the data and making the connections. The connections that they suggest are down here. So this is a diagram showing how the various tables can be connected to each other. And I'm going to be following that for the most part. So I'm going to go connect to a file and connect to that Bookshop data. And the first thing that I see on this diagram is that there is an inner join, which it's symbolized by these sort of Venn diagram. There's a join on book and info. And so to get started with that, I'm first going to just double click on book, and that will add it to the data source pane. And then I'm going to drag info out as well. Well, that doesn't work because that's creating a relationship, right? So this kind of flexible noodle thing is the symbol for a relationship. So in order to create a join rather than a relationship, I need to double click. And that takes me to what's called the physical layer where I can create the join. And so now I'm going to drag info out. See, if I did it this way, it would be a union. I'm going to drag it over here and then it creates a join, and I'm going to join book ID on, and then I need to do a calculation because these two need to be combined to create the key in the other table. So I'm going to do book ID 1 plus book ID 2. And so there we go. I'm going to click OK, and now I should get the preview pane. And so if we notice, there are 58 rows here, and the first few columns are coming from book, and then the remaining columns are coming from info. Right? So you see here, there's this info, and that means that's the table, that's the source. And if I remove this, you'll see that actually there were 58 rows to begin with in the book table and 58 rows after I do the join, right? So it's what's called a one-to-one relationship because every book ID matches only with at most one row in info. If there were multiple values in book ID with the same in info with the same book ID, then that would be a one-to-many, but this is just a one-to-one. So we're going to start with 58 rows, we do our join, and we keep all of those. We don't duplicate any data. We are just doing a very simple one-to-one match between these two tables just to add the columns from info to the book ID table. And now the other thing to point out is we see in the preview pane the entire combined table, right? Because we are now doing the combination before we start doing any analysis. And this is one of the key differences between joins and relationships. When we do a join, we actually combine the table from the data from both tables before we do our analysis. And so now if I close this and switch over to creating a relationship. So the relationships here, one of them is between book and author. So I'll create that one. And also between book and edition. I'm going to do that one later. But I'm going to start with book and author and just drag this over like that to create the relationship between this table, which is really the combination of book and info using a join, and the author table. And so now you see that I can preview one table or the other table, but I don't see them both at the same time, right? Right now I'm just looking at the data in the author table, and right now I'm just looking in the book plus info table, right? But I'm not looking at them both at the same time, and that's because with a relationship, you're not actually combining the data until you start doing your analysis, right? So for right now, I haven't started doing any analysis. I'm just seeing book by itself and then author by itself until I start doing some analysis. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go to sheet 1 and I'm going to create a view with author first name and last name, and then also with the book title. And so I don't know if you could see, but when I added title, I actually lost some authors because there are some authors that don't have any book associated with them. So if I do Control Z here to undo that, you see there's this person, Amelia, right? Amelia Wangerin or whatever. I'm not good at pronouncing these things. And so if I redo that, that author goes away because she did not match to any book, and so she's not included. And so if I want to make sure that I include even everybody, the thing is, this is a view that's only using dimensions, and unmatched dimensions aren't shown when we do that, right? But we can change that in a couple of ways. One way is to go to analysis and then go to table layout and say, show empty rows. And so now we see Amelia, we see Anastasia, there are others, Daryl here. These are authors that have never I guess published books. They're maybe just waiting to become authors or prospective authors. So here's Wendell Barton, right? These are the authors that have not published any books. And so when I go to analysis and then table layout and show empty rows, then they're included, right? And so now they're gone again because I uncheck that. There's another way that I can make sure that these authors are included, and that is to add a measure to my view, right? So if I add, I'm going to try adding author count here. And so now, again, they show up. When I add a measure, then those unmatched rows are also included. Right? So a couple different ways that I can do that if I want to include these unmatched authors. So now that's the first step. Now I'm going to look at adding edition and then the sales data eventually. So I'm going to add edition, which is connected to book, not to author. And so that's coming in as well. And again, we see edition by itself. We don't see it combined with author in the preview area here. These are all columns coming from the edition table. And we're joining on the book ID, right? But in this case, I think one book can go with multiple editions, right? So if I start a new sheet here and I put in the title, right? I will see that if I click on ISBN, which is I think the edition identification number, this book has two different identification numbers, and so does this one, right? So this is what's called a one-to-many, because one book ID can go with multiple different editions, many different editions, right? So it's not a one-to-one relationship anymore. And so now I've connected to edition, and then the next thing I want to do is connect to sales. And so I'm going to drag sales over here like this. And the sales table is connected, I think, on the ISBN number. The sales are not at the book level, they're at the ISBN number. And so that's how we're going to do the relationship, right, based on the ISBN. If I click on this noodle, you see ISBN must be equal to ISBN. But if we go back to here, we notice that it's actually the sales table that we're connecting to should actually be, this is the symbol for a union. There needs to be a union because we want all four quarters combined into a single table. And the sales table is, all of these different sales tables have the same data in them, right? I can preview it with this little button, and I see it's listing a sales date, an ISBN, discount, like this. And so this is just recording all of these sales. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag Q2 over here and add it as a union. And so now this, if I look here, edit union, I get this little pop-up that says, yeah, what I'm doing is I'm taking sales from Q1 and putting in sales from Q2, right? And then I can add in sales from Q3 and sales from Q4. So all of those tables, the rows from all of those tables are combined into one big table. And really, I should rename it so that it's clearer that it's not just Q1, right? The data diagram suggests, well, it doesn't really give it a name, but I should give it a name here. I could do sales Q1 to Q4 or something like that. Rename. I think this is an allowed name. I'm not sure if I can use a hyphen in the name. So now I've done a join. I've done a couple of actually 3 relationships, 1, 2, 3, and then I've done a union, right? And so if I'm previewing my union, and you see that there's a new column that says which table was used to create this row, right? So this is saying this row came from sales Q1 on the table names from sales Q1, right? The worksheet and then the table that generated this data. And if I get more rows, if I do like 1,000 rows instead in the preview pane, so I'm just going to change that, I should eventually see some sales from other quarters, I think. Maybe not. Maybe I have to go even farther. Yep, and if I scroll down far enough, I eventually get to the sales from Q2, right, all the way down here. So I've added these rows from Q2, Q3, and Q4 to the rest of the table. And so you can see that here. And so that is basically 3 out of the 4 types. The last type is the blend. That's the last way to combine tables. And so we'll be taking a look at that next. There is no blend specified in the diagram, but I'm going to create one anyway. So first I'm just going to remove sales Q1 and Q4 here, because I'm going to do a blend just on sales Q1. I'm going to go remove. I have 2 data sources. I'm just going to close the bookshop one, show you how I create a second data source. So do data, close data source. Then I go back to my data source pane, do new data source, Excel, and select my bookshop data so that I have a second data source. We have 2 separate data sources when we're creating a blend. So now I'm going to create it just with sales Q1. Now when I go over to my worksheet, I see that I have 2 separate data sources here. It's different from when I'm creating the relationships and joins and even unions for this data source, right? So here I've got join, and then here I've got a couple relationships, and these are all managed in one data source. With a blend, you've got these data sources separately. You've got book 2 plus and then sales Q1, and they're separate data sources listed separately over here. Now, in order to bring in data from sales Q1, I actually need to switch to that data source, and I need to have a linking field. So I'm going to link on ISBN. It looks like it's automatically being used as a linking field. This is the linking field which helps Tableau figure out how to combine these tables. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag over sales Q1 count, and this will tell me how many sales I have of these various books. Now that I've brought that in, I am doing a blend. I see here that I have this kind of green check mark next to book plus and an orange check mark next to sales Q1. And so that means that sales Q1 is the secondary data source, whereas book plus is the primary data source. In the blend, you can kind of think of that as like a left join, where this is the table on the left and this is the table on the right, basically saying we're always going to get everything from book and then bring in things from sales Q1 when we find a match on the linking field. It's a little bit similar. And if I go over to data edit blend relationships, you see that this is where we can change the blend relationships if we want to. But in this case, we're just linking on ISBN, and so that's enough. That's it for now on combining multiple data sources. Let's close it out with a quote from Edward Tufte. He says, "Graphical excellence is that which gives to the viewer the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time with the least ink in the smallest space." Thank you.